I live in a university dorm with two other roommates. Recently, while hanging out with friends at a house off campus, the topic of sleep paralysis came up, and having never experienced it myself, I simply listened to my friends' stories. When it came my turn to speak, I said something along the lines of, "I've never had it, but I hope to experience it at least once. That would be interesting." That very night, I had my first encounter with it. I couldn't believe it. I had gone 18 years and some change, and never once in my life had a paralysis experience, save for one questionable time as a kid when I had a particularly bad nightmare, but I can't remember it. When it first started, I knew almost immediately what was happening, considering that I had just been talking about the phenomenon earlier in the day. I figured that in talking about it, I had subconsciously allowed my brain to trick itself into creating sleep paralysis, so I let it happen. I was curious. As it began, it was pretty standard. I couldn't move, but I could see my room and look around. I tried to relax, but it was hard to do. If you've never experienced sleep paralysis, it's almost indescribable. I felt like a ghost possessing my own body. The weightlessness is particularly memorable. Despite having complete control over my vision, I felt as if I was rolling like an astronaut would in a vacuum. At this point, I was kind of enjoying the event. As it progressed, however, I distinctly remember reminding myself not to freak out if anything were to happen. Being semi-conscious while your body is asleep, however, seems to make the mind race. I remember having a sudden feeling that my paralysis was ended, and that I had been stuck for much longer than I really had. I think this is the closest thing to true dread that I had ever felt. Panic set in, and I frantically tried to wake up, so to speak, but I was completely unable to do so. At this point, I began hallucinating. To understand this, I should note that my room is situated so that one roommate has a bed at the foot of mine on the wall, perpendicular to my own, and my other roommate is parallel to me on the opposite wall. Keep in mind that roommate 2 and I can see the door to our room from our beds. When the hallucinations started, I was in a state of panic. Then the first thing that I really saw was what looked like water filling the room from under the door. The room is pitch black at this point. It was probably around 3 to 3:30 in the morning. That time frame sticks out in my mind, even though I had no real indication. So the water is really dark. At first it just slowly filled the room, but eventually I could make out very clearly something moving in it. At this point I was completely terrified, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even close my eyes. The worst part was the presence. I don't know if I can call it that, but that's how I'm going to refer to it. This presence that appeared to me. As I remember it, the movement in the water began coming closer to the door, but eventually it was more akin to thrashing, and it was all throughout the water. I remember the noise of the water splashing, being profoundly loud, like it was coming from within my own head. This only served to increase my panic beyond what I've ever experienced, and in that moment I was certain that if I moved, I would die. The presence then lifted me out of the water, and I rose up nearly to the ceiling, curving as if it were looking down at me in the bed. As silly as it sounds, I can only describe it as looking like a very slender cousin thing from the Addams family, with black hair and lacking the hat and sunglasses, of course. It smelled putrid, like a dead animal. As far as I could see, it was only a matting of wet hair, but the way it bent back and forth, like something that had been hit by a car, I'll never forget. I woke up screaming. I've never done that in my life. My roommates were terrified, of course, and after they helped me calm down, we stayed up all night. This was only about a week ago, and I've sort of gotten over it, but I can't help but notice that it's considerably harder for me to sleep. I have recurring nightmares about the presence, and there are things I notice when I lay in bed that I had never noticed before. I can be lying entirely still and hear the metal of my loft shifting. Sometimes I can even feel the bed shaking, like the legs are being lightly bumped. I've woken up 2 or 3 times in a cold sweat and with the feeling that there's a hair in my mouth that just won't go away for the rest of the night, or that there's something else on me or close to me that shouldn't be. I don't know if anybody else has ever had a similar experience to this. Maybe I never should have wished it upon myself, but I did, and now I'm terrified it will happen again. My grandma's house is very old, and all the rooms look like something out of the 60s. And she had this room that she referred to as the Purple Room. I slept in the Purple Room when my family was visiting. It isn't the best room of all time, but the beds are comfortable at least. But it has this really eerie chair that I've never seen anybody sit in since photos from like the 80s. And one night I was having your usual nightmare, but this dream was about a place I had been to just recently. It was my old preschool. But it was all run down and beat up. Our car stopped in front of it, and the door slowly opened to reveal what seemed like a 12-foot black figure with blood-red eyes. Scared the life out of me. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was the creature sitting in the chair, mocking me. And then it stood up, and it started to walk toward me. I couldn't move because of sleep paralysis. And the last thing I saw before I snapped out of it was this thing staring at me with a huge, disturbing smile on its face. I've had sleep paralysis since I was about 12. At this point, I'm pretty much used to it, even though it's terrifying every time. I always have these experiences in the same way. The same figure stands in the door, comes over to the foot of my bed, and floats above me, chokes me, and then eventually I wake up. However, today I saw the figure in the waiting room at the doctor's. It was standing in the corner near the reception desk, and it scared the living shit out of me. I looked around to see if anybody else saw it, and when I looked back, it was gone. I understand that sleep paralysis happens when you're falling asleep or waking up, but this was very real in the light of day, and I was fully awake. It gives me the chills just thinking about it. My depression and anxiety have been keeping me awake for a while. I think maybe I'm having some kind of quarter-life crisis. My life is good, and I have a very supportive family, but due to my anxiety, I know I've missed out on a lot of things, especially during my teenage years. Things such as having many friends, partying, stuff like that. I don't know why, but I get really nervous around people. That's why I often avoid them. I have few friends that I talk to, and only one that I can count on. Living with my parents at the age of 21 is making it even worse. Even though it's just temporary, it still makes me feel like shit. Last night, I was overthinking a lot of things until I fell asleep. I suddenly woke up confused whether I was having a nightmare or what. Still in bed, I tried to open my eyes, but I realized that it was already morning or maybe even afternoon. I couldn't see it clearly. It was like looking through a fisheye lens. I couldn't move, but I could hear. I looked down and saw a different version of my body. I had tattoos, and I looked dirty, pale, and thin. I was still in my room, in my parents' house, but it looked way different. I looked around and saw piles of clothes and empty food packages scattered on the floor. That was so messy. My head was hurting so bad, and the pain felt so real. And then I heard my parents screaming at each other. The sound was echoing, like they're half real and half not real. The sound was like they were fighting, which is odd because I've never heard them get into a screaming fight before. By this time I was panicking. Fear started to take over as things felt like they were slowly getting more and more real, and I feared that they would become permanent. My mind was screaming, "This isn't my life. I don't want to get stuck here." And finally I woke up. Honestly, I had felt like I was awake the entire time. It felt like descriptions I had heard of sleep paralysis. But it also makes me think of maybe the fact that I was given an opportunity to take a peek of my life in a different dimension, which, in a way, makes me feel lucky. I had a dream where I'm walking through a forest. It's beautiful. It's sunny and warm, and I feel safe and happy. There are huge honeycombs hanging from the trees. I want honey, but I can't reach it. A tall figure in black robes and a hood comes to stand beside me. The figure is silent, and I feel like I know them. I am not scared. I point at the honeycombs in the tree nearest us, and the figure uses a long scythe to slice through the honeycombs, coating the blade in thick golden honey. They lower the blade, and I eat the honey off. As soon as I eat the honey, I am suddenly horrified. I wake up, but I can't move. I'm facing the doorway to my bedroom, and there's a tall, thin figure just standing there. I feel like it's watching me. I can't move, and I'm absolutely terrified. Then our dog starts losing its mind, barking from the living room. The figure shoots away like it's gone down the hallway. I can move again, and I spend the rest of the night sitting in the living room with my dog with all the lights on. I've had slightly elevated anxiety ever since it happened. What was that thing? When I was 19, I had a particularly terrifying episode of sleep paralysis. I was pregnant with my first daughter, and I was sleeping on my back, facing up. I remember feeling someone grab my feet in my sleep, which made me wake up. Or so I thought. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I couldn't yell. All the standard things. All I kept thinking was that there was a woman grabbing my feet. I couldn't see her, so I don't know why I thought it was a woman. But I just knew that it was. In my head, she was an evil witch. It was a cold night, so I somehow was covered from head to toe with a blanket. My sister was sleeping right next to me. She was like 15, and I would sleep with her because I was scared of literally nothing. The person kept trying to pull me, and I even felt one that moved me down my pillow. I remember that my mom told me that bad spirits don't get near children, so I thought to myself, if bad things can't get to children, then why is this thing trying to take me when I'm pregnant? The moment it let go of me and I was able to move, I just covered up and curled into a ball and stayed covered under my blankets until I fell asleep again. I know that that witch wanted to take me. I often experience sleep paralysis, but I don't see any demons or witches or any of that kind of thing. I do get pretty damn scared when it happens. Anyway, a couple of days ago, about 3 o'clock in the morning, I suddenly woke up and realized that I had sleep paralysis. Usually it's just that I can't move a muscle and my body is like vibrating. When that happened, I saw a black rectangular shaped portal. The portal was thick black, and when I saw that, I felt like all of this energy was building around the back of my neck. That's really the best way I know how to explain it. It's like having that thing on Iron Man's chest on the back of your neck. Anyway, about a minute later, I recovered, and the energy and the portal were both gone. I don't know what the portal was or where it went to, but I'm glad I'm still on this side of it. I'm a heavy sleeper. I don't usually wake up at night, but when something has me up at an odd hour, I usually have some strange experience right at the brink of sleep. Such experiences include several where I felt like I was walking through a very strange version of my house and other aspects of my world, and others, like the one that I'll tell you about. Other times I've woken up into sleep paralysis. Last night I was having a typical dream. I can't remember much, but at the end of it, I seem to have woken up naturally. I say woken up because this incident has me believing that what followed was a dream, but it felt too real. I felt hands on my arm. For some reason I thought it was my mother, so I started speaking in mumbles. And for whatever reason, I couldn't make my voice audible. I couldn't move. I couldn't even bring my face out of the blanket so I could breathe better. Suddenly, I realized that the hands were very cold, and that my mother is certainly not the type to be so tactile. The hands were rubbing my shoulders, and I began to panic and mumble louder. That's when whoever it was spoke. "Shh, you can call me Mommy and Daddy." I don't know what that meant, but it sounded like a woman speaking it. The cold hand moved down to my stomach and pressed down really hard, and then the blankets felt like they were suffocating me. I screamed aloud then, and my actual mother came in to ask me if I was all right. I went back to sleep, but when we talked about it the next morning, she told me that she heard me talking before I screamed, so she thought I was having a nightmare. Even though it seemed like a nightmare, I'm totally convinced that I was actually awake. This was not my only experience with being touched in my sleep, but it was the most vivid. This happened when I was about 11. I woke up at about 7:30 in the morning and I just couldn't move. Over me, I saw a figure. It was like a dark, blurry figure. I was screaming inside. I was legitimately trying to move, and I was trying to scream, but the only thing that came out was a quiet whisper. I passed out and woke up 3 minutes later. I was trying to figure out what had happened, and it's not like my house is haunted, but I've never felt safe in my room. Multiple times I would see my cat on my top bunk, and she would just launch off of it under the bed, looking around like something was attacking her, but I couldn't see anything. Now I'm kind of scared of my room, and only once more it happened, but I was just frozen and covered by a blanket. I've never felt safe in my room. I don't know if my room is haunted or if it's just sleep paralysis, but whatever it is, it's terrifying. I've had a few sleep paralysis experiences in recent years. The most recent 3 or 4 have happened in quite close succession. Not night after night, but within a few weeks of each other. I've never seen anything during these experiences, but I have felt a deep sense of dread, like a demon is near me and its evil energy just emanates off of it. I can open my eyes and look around with my body lying there, staring at the ceiling, but I can't move my body. I was once laying on my side on a couch, still seeing nothing evil or anything. All I heard was a deep static like droning or buzzing. This all goes away once I call on Jesus' name. Of course it helps, but I just have to make myself talk, which takes a good amount of effort. I haven't had any more sleep paralysis encounters for a while. I also watched some YouTube videos about sleep paralysis, and they said that it happens mainly if you sleep on your back. On another note, I have seen a shadow person once before. It just looked at me for a few seconds, and then it went to the left and faded through the wall out of my sight. I haven't seen another one since then, but I wonder if seeing those and having sleep paralysis is somehow connected. So, a while back, I posted a story on Reddit. I told everybody how I had mild sleep paralysis and that I never saw anything. I only ever heard people mumbling, and it only took me like 30 seconds to snap out of it, and that I'd never been afraid. I made the mistake of talking about how I felt like I was supposed to be experiencing something scarier. Well, in the short time after I made that post, my sleep paralysis interactions basically went through the roof. I started to get it almost 3 times a week. The mumbling fine-tuned so I could actually hear what they're saying, and it's not good. The time frame for when I can move again varies, but it's definitely a lot longer than 30 seconds, and I've started to see things. I've seen people crawling under my bed, reaching out toward my dogs while saying that they're going to hurt them. I'm so afraid to go to sleep now, and I'm so confused. I wish I'd never said anything. Around February of 2019, on a Saturday night, I turned over to my wall side to sleep, like normal. I remember turning face up and trying to wake up. I tried to move, but I couldn't budge. I looked up to my ceiling to see figures walking and lights. In a split second after that, I heard drums. Drums as loud as they could go in my ears. I screamed for my aunt, but nothing came out. This went on for a very long time. I blinked and suddenly I was on my side towards my room. I see a black figure standing near the corner of my room, where I feel like it's always watching me from. It comes flying at me and I wake up, meaning I stood straight up from my bed as if I had been that way the whole time. I stood there for a few seconds, looked around, and saw that the time on my phone was 3:42. About 4 or 5 years back, my cousins and I went on a trip to this lakeside resort. We stayed there for about 3 nights. It was during the heavy rains when we stayed, so the power was cut. It was bound to happen on one of those nights, and it did. Me and 3 of my cousins and my sister were locked inside a bedroom, and since it was dark, and with the heavy storm outside, we began to panic a little bit. Then all of us saw a car passing by. With the lights from that car, a black shadow man came into the room, and it stopped near the door. I closed my eyes for a second and thought I was just seeing things because I was scared, but when I looked again, it was a shadow of a tall man wearing a hat and a long coat. I started screaming, and so did the others. I didn't think they saw it too, so I didn't say anything at the time. Right then, the shadow man kind of flew out the window. Then the lights came back on, and we unlocked the door and ran outside screaming. After about an hour or so, my cousin told me in a discreet way that she saw a man with a hat, and I said I did too. The other 2 heard and said they had seen the same thing as well. Ever since then, I've had about 5 sleep paralysis episodes. I don't know if he brought them or if he was the catalyst, but I had never experienced before I thought maybe I had imagined him, but I certainly didn't imagine the 5 sleep paralysis episodes that came after. I don't know what he is. Maybe a harbinger of bad things. All I know is I don't ever want to see him again. So, ever since I was little, I have experienced sleep paralysis. It happens to me so often that I'm used to it. For context, I live with my mom, my grandma, and my little brother. So one day I came home from school and I was really tired, so I decided to take a little nap. I was home alone at the time. I went upstairs and fell asleep in my mom's room. And that's when it started. Like I said, sleep paralysis happened so often that I didn't freak out when I couldn't move because I knew what it was. But this time, something was different. I've heard of people who say that they hear or see things when they're having sleep paralysis, but in my case, that had never happened. Not until that day. When I realized that I was having sleep paralysis, I started to hear someone walking toward the bed. They kept moving around it until I saw a woman wearing a red dress watching me. She seemed really sad, and she was there for about a minute, and then she turned around and left. But when she left, I felt something was trying to pull me out of the bed. I woke up and I was sitting on the floor. I was really scared, but I thought it was just a nightmare, until I told my mom about it. Then she told me that she had had a dream about a lady in red that was in the corner of her room crying. When my mom asked her what she was doing there, she woke up. So I really don't know what to think. So a while back, my sister, we'll call her Emma, told the family that she had this terrifying sleep paralysis, and she saw a white humanoid creature with black eyes looking at her from the foot of her bed. She's never had sleep paralysis before, and hasn't had it since. Now after this incident, my other sister's boyfriend, we'll call him John, had the same exact sleep paralysis with the same creature on the same night. Except this time he had a dream where he saw the monster running into Emma's house the night she had the incident. At this point, they have no way of communicating with each other, so they couldn't have planned this as some sort of elaborate prank. I didn't believe it either, but they both sounded so genuinely terrified when they spoke about the experience that I don't really have a choice but to believe them. I really haven't been able to come up with any explanation for this. It's still a total mystery to us.